Hypothetically, if you were a man at your place of work with 2 or 3 female coworkers who were having a conversation in the same room as you, such as a break room or someone's office, what subject would make you uncomfortable? In this situation, you are not involved in the conversation. You just happen to be at work and in the same room as the women, with no other coworkers present. Story 1. When they start being too graphic with their sexual exploits, it makes me fairly uncomfortable. I don't mind overhearing that they met a guy and had sex, or that they went with their boyfriend or husband on a trip or date, went back and had sex, good sex, bad sex, or a funny thing that happened during sex. But when they start talking about exactly what they did, how long or short he lasted, how big or small he was, where they did it, how they did it, what they did in what order, where things were placed, and how it felt, I do not want to hear that from anyone. Honestly, it is not a conversation you should have in the workplace, let alone in common areas. While such conversations are not very common, they are more frequent than I ever imagined. I know many women who are absolutely convinced that men's locker room talk puts women's conversations to shame, and as a result, they believe they can share anything with impunity because men are worse about it. That view is somewhat sexist. Sorry, ladies, but in my experience, it is quite the opposite. The things some of you share with a woman you've only known for a couple of months at work or school are things we only hint about with our lifelong best friends. This stereotype is absolutely backwards. Story 2. Their boyfriend's sexual attributes. Size, girth, performance, duration, and so on. It is bad enough that they discuss this casually with their friends. Doing it at work makes me extremely uncomfortable. Story 3. I do not think there is anything specifically that women might talk about that would not also make me uncomfortable if men talked about it. Story 4. I went with my girlfriend to her appointment to get a Papa Nicolau test as support, and I felt awful that she had to go through some invasive treatments. Now, every time I hear it talked about, I remember her discomfort and her gripping my hand, which makes me a bit anxious. It is important, and I am happy that there are places to help women stay healthy. However, I wish the procedures were more focused on the comfort of the woman while still being able to check her health. Story 5. I used to work in a cubicle farm with mostly women aged 20 to 25 and 3 men. When I was not on a call, I could hear everything because we were on the phone 80% of the time. The blatant sexual comments I overheard about male customers after they left our office were revealing. They were surprising both in frequency and intensity. Women have locker room talk too, especially when they forget men are listening. Story 6. Any comments or jokes like, men are useless, bad, and dumb because they are men. Am I right or am I right? Are as cringe as the women belong in the kitchen jokes. Then they will look at me and say, not you though. You're one of the good ones. I work mostly with women, and although I get on well with all of them, the little sexist remarks about men as a whole, such as how stupid or useless we are just because we are male, are annoying. I don't particularly enjoy some of them making nasty remarks about certain male customers' bodies or looks. I know that if a bunch of men were doing that to women, it would be seen as problematic, rightfully so. I just have to tolerate it. My manager is a woman, but she's okay. I remember her actually noticing how the anti-male jokes were annoying me and telling my colleagues to calm down. I have no issue with her. She's a pretty good manager. Ironically, I don't hear any of the men I work with make sexist jokes or comments about women. I'm not saying men don't do it, but the men I work with don't seem to. Having worked mostly with women and being around women most of my life, they really aren't much different from men. Story 7. What happens in the bedroom should stay in the bedroom. Everyone knows sex happens in the bedroom. Give your partner the privacy and dignity of keeping intimate details private. Story 8. The one thing I hate about being bisexual, aside from the occasional homophobia, is that many women gay zone you, and even worse, they assume you want to talk about how cute boys are. As someone who has been single for 7 years, the worst thing for my self-esteem is listening to women talk about how every other man they see is hot or cute, especially when you know you do not meet that standard. Story 9. How they talk about their partners and other men. It might be sarcastic, but often it becomes very uncomfortable, like comparisons or ridicule. It is not subtle. Sexual topics as well, with little filter. I have heard examples where boyfriends are doing something sweet, and the amount of mockery genuinely made me feel sorry for the men if they knew. Honestly, also when they are in very toxic relationships and adamantly refuse to see it. Story 10. Anything that you would not say to me, you should not say while I am in the room. In return, anything I would not say directly to you, I will not say while you are in the room. Are you really not aware of how mutual respect works? And why would gender be relevant? Story 11. Uncomfortable? Nothing. If they know I can hear them, that is on them. I have been around too long and seen and done plenty of unusual things in my life. I have no hang-ups. Story 12. Other than just constantly hating and being biased against men, there really isn't much that would bother me. But then again, I don't think anyone really enjoys a bigot, especially when that bigot is prejudiced against them. Story 13. Me. It is the same as if it were a group of men talking and I was not involved. Otherwise, I would simply mind my own business. It is none of my concern what they are talking about, really. Story 14. Women complaining about their poor online dating matches. If it smells bad everywhere you go, check your shoe. Story 15. Had to sit through 3 women escalating their misandry over a couple of hours. They started with men should have a curfew of 6 p.m., then moved to men should be electronically tagged, and finally to men should be chemically castrated and forced to live in camps. As I recall, the incident that upset them was a man refusing to pay for a drink for one of them over the weekend. I recorded it, but Human Resources said I was overreacting and warned me not to record people. Story 16. The usual negative stereotypes about men, especially when they try to involve me while I am just trying to work. Yes, I am trying not to listen because I am at work where I am supposed to be working, as are you. It is hard enough for me to concentrate with you talking all the time. I have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and they know this. And now you want me to join in on the conversation as the men's representative? You want me to be your punching bag and respond to all the inappropriate things individual men said or did. Just be quiet and let me work. Story 17. Anti-man feminism, as opposed to equality-based feminism, motivates me significantly. This is likely similar to any political or other ideology, except that this one is specifically gender-based. Story 18. Casual misandry and sexism. When a group of men are in a room, they typically talk about various topics. When a group of women are in a room, it often does not take long to start expressing strong negative feelings towards men. Not every woman is like that, but it has happened quite frequently around me. Story 19. In my experience, women provide more details when discussing relationships or sex. I would prefer not to hear about it from anyone, but the next best option is not to be told specifically what is going on. Story 20. I worked with women for close to 2 years. There were only a couple of conversations that made me uncomfortable, which were related to female anatomy. If the roles had been reversed and I was talking about my male anatomy, I am sure they would have been uncomfortable as well. It is fine to talk about such topics outside of the workplace, but it is not appropriate in any workplace setting. Story 21. If something could make someone uncomfortable at work, it should not be discussed in the workplace. Many people do not understand this. Story 22. I don't think there is much that would not also be uncomfortable if said by a man. Sexual exploits, excessive relationship drama, speaking negatively about people behind their backs, general misogyny, misandry, or other bigoted speech. I do not hear much of this except people speaking negatively about others, and I typically stay out of it regardless. Story 23. I have worked in male-dominated fields for the last 15 years. I have truly heard it all, and nothing makes me uncomfortable now. My coworker and I even joke about her menstrual period occurring at the same time as my wife's. Story 24. I am fairly close with many of the women I work with, and they are on average much older than me. They occasionally talk about their intimate lives with their husbands when they are all relaxing in a group, but I am the only man present. I feel like I am not really part of that conversation. I do not care much, but it is definitely unusual. Story 25. Blatant bias against men. If I started going off on a racist rant filled with offensive language, wouldn't you be uncomfortable? Why is it okay to be openly sexist but only against men? In a professional setting, no less. The nerve of many women these days. Story 26. Probably a conversation about how disgusting men are or anything else that paints us all with really broad strokes. The kind of stuff that would make anyone uncomfortable, I guess. Story 27. Getting a little tired of the patriarchy and misogyny excuse for everything that is hard or that they do not like. Story 28. How cute their children are or what they have accomplished. I am among the minority who does not like children and never wants children. I do not find them cute at all. They are just irrelevant to me. So I do not care what they did, how they look, what they wore, or whatever. I avoid conversations about children like the plague, especially when they are showing photos of their child on their phone. Because what I am thinking is, to be honest, I find stray animals infinitely cuter than your child. Story 29. Not a problem. I am aware of negative talk towards the general male population, such as, why are men the way they are, or why are men such pigs? And then people look to me as if I will be offended. I am not, because I am not that person. However, the sheer explicit talk I have heard from a group of women, even when in a committed relationship, discussing some random man they encountered and the things they would do if they had the opportunity, is stunningly ironic. I remember working at a store emptying trash bins by the service counter. Two women, one a manager and the other a cashier, were talking about men's genitalia. Both were white women. The manager, who was larger, openly criticized white men for having smaller genitalia and said she could not be with a white man because of it. The cashier challenged her claim, then looked at me with a sincere look of disbelief when the manager emphasized how rare it is for her to find a white man who is well endowed. Lastly, I have many female friends who openly discuss their hygiene routines and issues with me, simply because I am not grossed out by menstruation, clots, drainage, pH balance, and similar topics. Story 30. My former supervisor and her manager would discuss engine turbines, but they referred to them as daddy turbines. I found that confusing. Story 31. Flatulence and bathroom conversations. Women do not engage in these topics. It makes me uncomfortable when they deny it and pretend otherwise. Who do they think they are fooling? Story 32. My wife sometimes goes into very specific details about her menstrual cycle. I understand that it is natural, but I do not need to hear about heavy versus light flow. I certainly would not want to hear about it at work. Story 33. Nothing really. I expect everyone to stick to topics appropriate for a professional environment. And in my experience, this has not been a problem. I do not recall any controversial political opinions or explicit sexual details. Story 34. Talking about their partner's private parts. First of all, I do not want to know that. Second, this seems like a huge breach of privacy. Their excuse for this is that it is their sex life too. Sorry, what? That is equivalent to someone showing their sex tape to someone else without asking their partner, just because they themselves are part of it. Story 35. It is all hypothetical, but I would say if they start talking about lesbian relationships and being intimate with another woman, that would make me very uncomfortable if I were the only man in the room. Story 36. How much do you all hate men? I learned to tune women out, but when you talk about hating men, you always look to me for a response. What response do you want? Story 37. I have worked with both men and women. Women have the worst locker room talk. I have worked in construction and in the health field with predominantly women. Women talk about nothing but bodily functions and sex. Story 38. I once hooked up with a human resources staff member over a weekend, and after the next work week, at least 20 female office colleagues started calling me Giant Stallion. My wife and her office colleagues talk about their partner's physical attributes in bed. There was a time when her female office colleagues kept asking me not to wear underwear when they visited our house. Conversations about sexual exploits and sexual lives really make me uncomfortable. Story 39. Colleagues insist on knowing how I spend my free time and weekends. For example, Deborah, I sit at home and relax. Story 40. I think my friends forgot I was there or something, but they started passionately talking about adult novels like 50 Shades of Grey. I was shocked and also a bit concerned. Story 41. I do not like it when people talk about checking out men's groin areas and estimating their genital size based on that, especially when I can hear it. It is not something I can engage with. Story 42. The whole I hate men. but you are one of the good ones thing. Just because I behave myself does not mean I am not fairly similar to any other man. And for what it is worth, how am I supposed to trust that I am not being talked about in the same way behind my back? It is really isolating. Story 43. Honestly, period discussions. I want to hear about periods about as much as I want to hear about bowel movements. Story 44. Locker room conversation. Women tend to be very detailed in their discussions of boyfriends, crushes, and preferences. Story 45. Women seem to think men being grossed out by periods is just a form of casual misogyny, when the reality is that many women share detailed and graphic descriptions of their bodily functions that some find unsettling. Periods are a natural bodily function, but if you talk about them in an excessively explicit or immature way, it can cause discomfort for others. A man from a mostly female family. Story 46. Literally nothing. Unless they are talking about crimes they committed, abuse they have performed, or other actions that go against my morals, I truly will not care. In fact, when they talk about female hygiene and look at me saying sorry about this, I always reply, you do not have to apologize. I have a wife and a mother. I am not a stranger to that. Specifically, apologizing to me makes me feel like they think I am not mature or able to handle it, which annoys me. Story 47. I've been married for 25 years and have been on the internet for 32. The only things they could say that would bother me should also bother any person with a shred of conscience. Seriously, please do not talk about cruelty to animals at work. Who would die from that, Barbara? Story 48. Everything. I don't like their stories at all. Don't get me wrong. I love women, but their stories are not interesting to me. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.